this new generation coming through and they're looking at how expensive consoles are now and thinking, well, why they just don't have that money anymore versus, free to play games or just kind of digital content in general, and the sort of cost benefit. In terms of like that next defining genre or that next category defining game, for the first time in a long time, there's not like a clear answer. So I think X is always going to be that anchor for that true crypto crowd, but for retail, it's everywhere beyond X. Basically, save faster, really, rather than saving 2-3%, where you're not actually saving if you take into account tax, inflation, etc. You're probably actually just breaking even, versus do the same thing that you love doing over here in our app, save faster towards those life goals or moments that, again, they're talking about on TikTok every day. Why are they saving? They're saving for, holidays, cars, apartments, rainy days, really boring stuff to crypto, but really important stuff to them. People like Monzo and Revolut. Like for me, why on earth would I go to a bank? It's an inconvenience. The difference from us is we realised that just wasn't going to work. So we didn't just stop the business. We luckily found another area that we move into. I think that's been the challenge for the space, is a lot of these Web3 games lived and died by the sword. That to me makes no sense. You're building a business.
Hello, Ron. Today we're talking to John. John, for those who don't know you, what's a quick background?
Thanks for having me today. So my background started off in advertising, then led in the early days of mobile, built an early mobile ad network, nexted to a NASDAQ listed software company that led me into the deep down rabbit hole of gaming, tech and monetization. From there, more onto the sort of content side, and around 10 years in games publishing and development on the content side. And yeah, it's a real passion of mine, building games and consumer apps, and also working with IP and license holders. So I built Nerf's first ever hyper casual game, Epic Pranks, that was incredible. And then all of that has just been building into, Web3 and this overriding curiosity for what we're going to talk about today, right? What happens when you mix consumer content, games with blockchain technology? Where's that going to take us, both at an underlying kind of tech level in terms of, maybe some of the problems that we're living through from a Web2 gaming perspective, but also some of the interesting things about blockchain and, the earning DeFi components and what you might be able to cook up with content. So that's kind of what's brought me to where we are today.
If we don't focus on any solve right now, what do you think, when you're looking around, are the kind of problems that do need attention?
So if we take a step back, and I think this isn't for me just about crypto. If you think about, like, let's just look at a consumer level, what's happening, and also gaming, right? Because it's obviously a big part of our journey. So if we think about coming out of post-COVID, what's happened, right? COVID was incredible for gaming. Right, because people were just stuck at home playing games, large amounts of disposable income because they just can't go out into the world and spend it like they used to. We also saw that with crypto, right, with obviously like the the stimmies from last time, all that kind of stuff. So what's been happening after that at a global level, and what's that meant for gaming? Well, we've had a bit of a reset because valuations just got insane because revenue was just kind of spiking in player growth, and people went back out into the world. So a lot of numbers just started dropping. Right? And as a result, a lot of these global games businesses, as you've probably seen in the headlines, there's been huge amounts of redundancies and layoffs, but also there's been a lot of opportunity. There's been a huge amount of M&A as well. There's been people sat on a large amount of cash, the public investment fund in Saudi buying Scopely out of Savvy Games and EA. You've had, Triple Dot dropped 800 million on AppLovin's mobile games business, but also some other things are happening. We've got this new generation coming through and they're looking at how expensive consoles are now, thinking, well, why they just don't have that money anymore versus, free to play games or just kind of digital content in general, and the sort of cost benefit there. Then kind of stepping on from that, the macro level, we're living in really challenging economic times with inflation, rate cuts, and at times crypto is in a bubble. But if you get out into this sort of broader consumer world, that's the reality of what everyone's facing. Here in the UK, I'm based in the UK, we've got a budget coming tomorrow that everyone's nervously waiting on, that's going to have all kinds of business and consumer impacts. So I think really gaming is just going through this interesting transition right now. It's not like people still aren't gaming. Growth has slowed down. I think over the next few years, it's sort of 4% top line growth for gaming overall. So gaming is still growing, but there's no doubt we're in this transition period where we're getting hit by changes in consumer habits. We've got some technology, not challenges, but opportunities with blockchain that we'll talk about today, but also AI. And then yet at a business level, it's kind of, you're getting hit from both angles. You've got lots of large businesses now having to trim their P&Ls and figure out where their next level of growth is coming from. And then sort of bottom up, indie studios have been hit badly as well. When I look at Web3 gaming specifically and where I think we're at now, if you think Web2 gaming is kind of taking a hammering with all that in mind, is it any real surprise to anyone that's very close to gaming that Web3 gaming is actually where it is, because you've almost got like a startup, a niche within a giant sector that is struggling from all angles. For me, looking at the state of Web3 gaming now, with lots of studios closing, lots of studios leaving and going back to Web2, really isn't a surprise at all. So for me, I think really the question we need to be looking at is where next for gaming, not just Web3 gaming, because that's the question everyone is actually trying to answer. No matter who I've spoken to over the past 6 months, there isn't necessarily a clear consensus other than obviously AI games, blockchain games, still there's something there. But in terms of like that next defining genre or that next category defining game, for the first time in a long time, there's not like a clear answer. That's where I kind of generally think we are at the moment at a gaming level.
And then if we just teleport 2 years in the future, we don't know how we've got there. We don't know how we've solved these problems. What would solved actually look like? Or at least progress. Maybe we haven't solved it in 2 years, but progress.
When I look at a Web3 lens specifically, like gaming as a business, I'd like to see a reset on that. What I mean by that is we're here to build a business, right? This isn't a hobby, it's not a project, right? So for a business to work in a game or consumer app context, it's basic maths, right? The value or time spent of people in my apps or ecosystem and the money that they are generating, not revenue. Revenue is great, but let's say net profit. So taking out all of my business operating costs, my advertising, dividends, token buybacks, whatever it is. The business of gaming is in a healthier state, right? Because then that's great for everyone. There's less layoffs. That means there's more actual games and content that are now working, that are able to sustain the flywheel of games and consumer apps, whether it's Web 2 or Web 3. Because at the moment, that's a little that is broken. So fast forward to 2 years, I would love to see, we were talking about this before the show, and I think Look at Pixels is a very good example of this. People that are driving towards this goal that actually works for everyone. We start arriving at a destination where, for those that want to earn from the game, they are able to earn from a game without completely tanking the game's economy or the game's ability to survive for any length of time. And if there is also this other balanced group of players that don't necessarily want to earn or earn as much, there's still a way for them to contribute and get what they need from the game, and for those two to kind of work together. For me, in 2 years' time, I would love to no longer be having conversations necessarily talking about business models or just hypothetical situations. You know, if you think about a lot of your content, I'm sure you would love just to actually be deconstructive fun in terms of Web 2. It's like deconstructive fun in Web 3. It's just there is finally just a batch of games where like genuine real interest about the business models, the economies and what's happening, as opposed to an absolute car crash of just FUD, you know, the token's broken, nothing works. I'd love for us to be in that situation in a couple of years' time.
And I think that kind of looking at your history already, you've already kind of been building along that trajectory, I'd say, with Play Ember. For those who haven't seen them, you kind of focused mainly into the casual games, game mechanics that people already knew, and then bringing in users to it and adding into the blockchain. What was the reason going down that route of kind of iterating on stuff that you've seen in traditional gaming, rather than, when you mentioned that we're moving into more of a business focus now, I think early on we had a lot of passion projects where people just had a spark. They thought, I like it, maybe other people would like it. Why did you go with a different direction of maybe starting with a foundation that has already kind of been proven?
Yeah, so I think what we saw is huge success, and I helped build one, a rewarded video in terms of free-to-play games is a $1 billion business. Players understand it. I play a game and I watch an ad and I get a gem, a skin or something in return, and I get back into the game and there's a business model, and really without that, free-to-play gaming wouldn't exist. It's that simple. We looked at that. We looked at all the other things that are very normal in games, right? Offer walls where, okay, I'm playing a game. I don't necessarily want to spend money in the game, but I'll go and do a quest and maybe download another game, get to level 10, and I get the thing I want in the game, another skin, but then there's a commercial model behind that. Okay, I get a skin, but me as the developer, I'm getting, whatever it is, $5, $10 for basically providing not just an install, like a meaningful player to a third party. The challenges we saw in that, in terms of that transaction specifically, me as a user, okay, I get something in game, but I don't get any of the direct money from that. And these CPA payouts can be very interesting. They're big business. So that was one area that was interesting. Okay, if we look at the existing behavior, we look at rewarded video, players doing lots of tasks linked to the main game, downloading third-party apps, doing surveys. How could blockchain rails enable us to provide a better reward system to Web2 players? So basically crypto rewards. And this already exists in Web2. There's no shortage of like Web2 games businesses or consumer businesses where I'm basically, playing games, but by doing extra stuff, I can actually get vouchers and rewards. So again, from a consumer behavior, it already exists as this idea of playing games to get money. Like I would argue play to earn has been around for years in gaming. It's not a Web3 thing. So that was the sort of consumer starting point. It was our first white paper, right? How can we use blockchain technology to find better ways to reward players? And in our context, that's the other key thing here. We sit in this spectrum of casual games. So I've never thought of this audience in my career as gamers, right? These are consumers, right? That gaming is just part of the sort of daily entertainment mix of like Netflix, Amazon, streaming, collecting stuff. They are not hardcore gamers, right? And that's really important from a design perspective when you think about one, the type and value of rewards that they expect, and then two, the type of game and gaming environment that feels very comfortable to them.
I like the fact that you're picking up on the audience already, because that's one of the roads I wanted to go down. So I ran a couple of surveys around what people expect from play to earn, how much they expect to get out of a game. And I think right now that the Web3 audience has almost spoilt itself because some of the early runs, they saw some big numbers. Whereas in comparison, I'm still reviewing traditional mobile games pretty much every week. And there was one game that wanted your Facebook, your email, and your mobile number. And they gave you 99 gems, which was the equivalent of about 50 cents in game. And people are obviously doing it, or else they wouldn't ask people for that details. Do you think that high expectations of Web3 audience for kind of playing to earn means that actually they're probably the wrong audience to even go after with this kind of game?
In crypto, what's your reference point? Earning is a word in itself that can lead you down a rabbit hole, right? There's literal free money where I've done nothing and I get an airdrop, right? Have I earned it? Well, possibly I might have earned it. If you think about how airdrops maybe are changing a little bit, they're looking for your genuine on-chain contribution now, and I've done something, so you could argue that. But generally that comes from business models that look nothing like gaming, right? It's huge, like L1, L2 businesses that have raised hundreds of millions, giant, well-managed volumes on large exchanges. That is the business model. If you go back to where we started, so to take a fundamentally different business model of games and just try and, I wouldn't even say plug it in, but just mash it together with this model. If we think that this audience is the same audience that we're trying to build Web3 games on, their expectation is, look at it yesterday with Monad, right? There were people complaining that, I only got $100. $100 is, to your frame of reference, $100 to anyone in casual gaming as a one-off reward. People are like, what is this? Like, this is mad. You just give me $100. That's like, I don't know, that could be like 6 months worth of hard grinding and playing games and doing quests and everything adding up. Again, we're going back to discussions you and I and everyone's had in gaming. It's what is the business model that combines a traditional game that enables a scenario where regular payments of even $100 are something that's vaguely sustainable. I don't know. So I think if we step back, then again, sometimes I ask the same question. We have absolutely made this mistake early on, and I feel like you almost not necessarily have to make this mistake, but you need to realize this really quickly. Web3 gaming, I still think there are groups that work very hard and really believe in the idea of Web3 gaming, but you're back to this, that if you're making a fun game for, let's say, Web2, that audience, generally speaking, is not on X. Right? That audience is on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Web2 adnects, and their frame of reference and what they expect and what you're designing is totally different. Versus Web3, let's just call it a DeFi audience for now. Their expectation is my primary thing I want to do is earn. And that's the game. Earning is the game, the sort of dopamine sensation. There are games, in inverted commas, that I think have done this quite well, that are these very, you had like Dith on the previous episode as an example. Perfect. That's probably the best example I can give.
Kind of just touching on the idea of those gamers aren't on X. I think one thing that when you guys did start putting out the games, you were putting out Pudgy, Skin of one. There was a couple of other games that came through before you moved a bit more towards the Bitcoin kind of clicker ones. And people on the timeline were surprised. Hey, this game already exists. You've just put Pudgy Skins on it. That was always the message. Was it surprising how the timeline took it? Or do you think it is just that idea of, you've already mentioned that most casual gamers don't see themselves as gamers, whereas there's more hardcore gamers on X that are commenting? interesting?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things in there. So the free-to-play business model, it's been one of the biggest challenges because you're not building a game. It's the opposite of building in public. So the way it works is you're trying to build a prototype on a hidden account so no one actually knows it's you, right? They can just see a made-up developer name. And you're trying to quickly run some tests to validate, is this game interesting? Right, so you're typically looking initially at playtime. Maybe I'll build 10 levels. You do it as quickly as possible. Go to the Unity asset store, right? There's Unity asset packs that you can go and buy. And you're trying to put a game out there as quickly as possible to then move to the next stage, or you kill it. And the reason you're doing that is because you're running a business. So my job has always been as a CRO of these businesses, part of the revenue officer part is obviously to make money, but you make money by spending as little as possible on ideas early on. This has always been the way. If you think about like Voodoo, right? Billion-dollar French company backed by Tencent. They started off in hyper casual. Now they're in casual, non-gaming, exactly the same. And it's almost like this fun little war that's going on around the world that no one really knows about, where everyone's trying to sniff out people's hidden accounts as quickly as possible. And that's the way it works, right? You then build up a giant library of game engines, game assets, and part of that necessity is speed. If you look at most games, you could probably say, oh, that looks like this game, or that's got this from this game. It's just been the business model for years. When we were designing the Pudgy game, that's the business model. We looked for a high retention game mechanic that we already had from one of our games that we call Idle Arcade, which was sort of like a idle farming type mechanic with a time unlocking system. So of course we're going to reuse that game engine because it's already got proven that players like that mechanic and we have all the base level data. But on the front end, at an art level, what are we doing? Well, we're not necessarily reskinning is a dangerous way. We had to create a whole load of new Unity-based assets for the game. But of course, we already had some Unity assets from the base game, but we had to change lots of colors. So Web3 lives on FUD. So of course, if you don't understand any of that and you just look at the game at face value, then yeah, it's just that all you've done is reskin that game. But hopefully I've explained, well, one, you don't just reskin it. There's actually a lot of work, development work that needs to go on. We added lots of new mechanics. There's a lot of new art that needs to be designed. Whether you accept that or not is fine. But the separate point that, again, don't believe me, go Google and read up on it. But that's the business model of games. It's not going to stop because the whole business model is who can get to market first. The best example I can give you is when Squid Games first kicked off season 1, 7-8 years ago. I think there were like 20 games in the top 100 on Android, all about Squid Games. Like they're pretty much the same game, all using Unity Store assets, all pretty much the same level or little bits of mechanics, a little bit of a puzzle, a little bit of a runner, all kind of meshed together. But again, that's the that's the business model. So if you're building in casual games, unlike your earlier question, where like a big AAA game where you're literally building everything from scratch, you've got giant art teams and now obviously AI to some extent. It didn't surprise me at all because again, I don't think there is a real understanding about the business of games or any desire to understand the business of games in Web3 out of certain pockets of people, which is back to my earlier comment. I am not surprised at all Web3 gaming is where it is. If you think about the state of Web 2 gaming in general, well, of course, Web 3 gaming is going to be even worse because it's much younger than an established business with a revenue model and all this stuff that's proven. So I'm not surprised at all. I think the surprise from within Web 3 gaming has come because you've got people investing in Web 3 games that have got no idea about the business of games at all. I know there is a group of founders that over the past few years have just talked very openly about the business of games. People that in crypto, everyone's here to make money, that probably have come out with no game and just trying to get rich quick and selling whatever that other people have bought into. But yeah, that's why we are where we are. Is back to your previous question, you're either making a game which is not a traditional game, which is where PMF is in crypto. The people that still have survived in Web3 gaming, the reason they're not actually building for, let's say, CT or a native audience anymore is because they're building on blockchain rails, but they've figured out a business model that works and their target audience, and they're competing with Web2 gamers. Kind of feel like this debate has quietened down now because for the simple reason, Web3 gaming is dead because there's no way for me to make money from it versus DeFi. So it's not like Web3 gaming has died. In a sense on the timeline, it kind of has, because there's no interesting quick way to make money from it anymore, and therefore it's not interesting. I still think there's a business model there, just very different to, let's just say, what everything around DeFi and stablecoins and L1s and L2s. That's why you've got teams now still love blockchain technology but are very focused on PMF, which is back in Web 2 in consumer.
And before we continue down kind of the journey of where it's going to, because I want to go on to the Bitcoin clickers, I think that's something that has come up. I think that the idea idea that before Web3 gaming was getting lumped in the whole crypto, and the idea that you might make it 100x, 1000x, that some people did see, mainly by selling to someone else who then actually made that loss. I think games are getting closer to what you would see from a normal game. Maybe you get in early, you make a 2 to a 10x. And I think that's why, like you say, it's not as interesting. No one's getting excited by those type of returns. You're not suddenly going to wake up to a Lambo. And that's why I think people are mainly, who are looking for that quick money, are pivoting out into whatever the next shiny bauble is. So maybe it's AI agents, maybe it is onto prediction markets like we're seeing now.
The idea is still interesting. You have like very complex game economies, and in Web2 people spending huge amounts of money on in-game assets. There are these sort of like off dark web like trading like trading arenas, or in Roblox to an extent there's a lot, not necessarily trade, but there's a lot mini in-game marketplaces and economy around that. So idea still stands. I think Pudgy Party and Mythical are probably one of the teams that are getting the closest to it to an extent, where they kind of found first of all really great games with amazing IP, right? FIFA, like the biggest football IP in the world, NFL, right? Those things are incredibly helpful when you've got the biggest IP in your category, and now Pudgy as well. Just trying to build in a on-chain marketplace that if I'm coming in from Web 2, do I really need to know anything about that? I can still buy a skin, and by the way, there's something I can trade. Whereas to your point for Web 3, if you're in early and you're getting one of those earlier skins, there's an initial marketplace there on Pudgy. The reason their math works is because they have got, if you think about FIFA and NFL, you've just got a giant player base. You need these economies of scale to work, and I haven't seen the latest stats on Pudgy. I saw it doing very well in the charts, and I'm assuming there's really good economies of scale there. So I think that's still interesting. It's just for most games, we were no different early on. That was the initial idea everyone was kind of building to for. The big difference from us is we realised that just wasn't going to work. So we didn't just stop the business. We luckily found another area that we move into. I think that's been the challenge for the space, is a lot of these Web3 games lived and died by the sword. That to me makes no sense. You're building a business. Why just carry on building something that ultimately is never going to work? To people, there are different types of investor, but spent money on an NFT asset for some future value that they think is coming that is never going to work. That's where this has really then all come tumbling down, because there's nothing to back that up. Whereas for us and a few others that are from a gaming background, that's actually not a bad thing. It means we actually know when to kill games. In Web3 there is this weird thing where I put a tweet about the other day about it, where if you fail or you kill something, that's bad. That's good. That means you've got people in the business that know how to run a business. Back to my point about killing games. So for us, we did try early on some of these, kind of Web3 IP games with NFTs and collectibles in. And part of it's on us, maybe the design just simply wasn't good enough. But I think our main learning was the incentive just wasn't big enough compared to that time reward calculation. And that's, I completely get it, because we're up against these amazing DeFi apps and trading apps, and maybe not so much now, but the trenches where you can make a few thousand or thousands in a matter of seconds. We were never going to compete with that with our type of games. But amongst all of this and experimenting, that didn't work, this didn't work. Again, Bitcoin early on was an interesting test for us, where we work with the guys at Zebedee, and it's not as simple as you just put a Bitcoin SDK in a game and you now have a Bitcoin game. There's a lot of work that needs to be done around that. But amongst all these different games that we were testing and trying, that was the one from a player data perspective that immediately stood out as, okay, this is incredibly interesting. And why is it interesting? We were seeing double the amount of playtime, double the amount of retention. We were seeing a significant increase versus like the Web 2 monetization we had. So that's why immediately, as someone that runs a business and I look at the cost I'm putting into different games and resources, that's immediately why we didn't just jump straight into that, but we were paying very close attention to these numbers, because we weren't seeing these numbers in any of our other games. For us, that was the starting point to really where we are now.
And do you think that being able to do the, killing games, find something else with data and follow it down the line, you're able to do it partly from the angle that NFTs that you'd already put out were more studio based? I know like Rumble Arcade, they got an NFT, but it's studio based as well. Do you think it's the fact that games do assets that are very tied to this one idea that they've started, which makes it harder for them to kill it, because they then have to try and transfer your ownership into something new?
I think that's a really fair and good observation. And I think that's where you do then get boxed in, versus if you just think like a battle pass for a specific game, you immediately set the rate of, this is a battle pass for this game, that's it. It's not often a battle pass for our 15 other games. If you want that game, you have to find that battle pass. So I think, yeah, for gaming, that's been part of the challenge everyone's been trying to reconcile. Quite often, if we take the NFT model, like a one-time purchase of an asset for X amount with an expectation of basically almost like perpetual rewards from that one-time fixed asset, that's a very challenging business model to reconcile. Certainly from our perspective, yes, as we've evolved, we've been having an honest conversation with our community about how that asset in our ecosystem has to evolve versus where we started and what we wanted to do. That hasn't worked. So we just had a simple choice. We either basically carry down a route that kind of liked and wanted to work, but the simple reality is there was something else that was clearly working. The question then is now how you fairly reconcile people who have spent money on an asset that was actually intended for a different type of games, how you try and reconcile that with the new direction you're going in so that they feel like they're getting some value and involvement in where you're going. And that's not easy to do. In a weird way, the good thing about a fungible asset is any point if people don't like where you're going, just like if you have shares in a company, you can sell it. Obviously, with that, completely understand, and I'm not being facetious in terms of people not stomaching a loss, but this is the sort of topic that is almost the elephant in the room the entire time in any financial scenario, whether it's shares, tokens, or NFTs, is ultimately people are here to make money, and you need to have your own rules and whatever price points that you want to exit. I think you're right. I think a lot of businesses that's where they failed is sometimes it's not comfortable, but you just have to have the uncomfortable conversations to then go on that next chapter and give people that opportunity to make that decision. I still think if you take back to Pudgy as an example, those kind of like micro transaction type NFTs in games, still to an extent make sense because that already exists in terms of Web2. You're just using a different payment rail. But yeah, I think this idea certainly for games of this one NFT that gives you lifetime access and value from multiple different games, I think we all agree just doesn't it just doesn't work.
And then kind of continuing the audience idea, you've got an audience for the NFTs, you then say, the audience and the playtime and the stats you start seeing for the bit time clickers. How do you then move kind of down that funnel and then end up to where you start going more into the kind of consumerify Kinsu? Is it a straight path, or is it suddenly something that just, actually this now makes sense because what we've been seeing here?
How we ended up there was this. So we started out with a small portfolio of games, and it was a very, very simple integration using Zebedee, where the way it works is you play the game and you get a fractional reward in off-chain in-game Satoshis based on your time in-game. And the way that we unlock that value is based on ads, right? It's a free-to-play game. It's based on ads, and it's done on a dynamic eCPM basis. So what that means is the value of an ad is not the same around the world. So the value of an ad in America is very different to the UK, is very different to Vietnam, is different to Australia. The reward you get is, and for the business model to work, it has to be this way, is based on, the ads you are consuming in the country you're in and also in the game you're in, because that's the other variable. Depending on the game genre and type, it will vary the price that the advertiser pays. So we started seeing this and we realized pretty quickly that, okay, to my earlier comment, these aren't your traditional casual gamers. These are consumers that want to earn crypto, and they happen to be doing it through these kind of Bitcoin, miner clicking games. What they were telling us is we have a Discord specifically for these Bitcoin games as well. We were listening to what they were saying. We were looking at what they were doing in the game. Their motivation is to earn. So no surprise then we put an offer wall in the game that, as well as playing the game and earning through ads, you can do exactly what I said at the start. Go and download Candy Crush. Unlike Web2, where you download Candy Crush and me as the developer gets all of the profit, there is then a rev share with you as the user where you can earn more Satoshi for downloading that third-party game. The same with all of these Web2 offer walls around surveys or data labeling and micro tasks. We started adding them into the game, and people were like, well, this is great. I can now just earn more money. I now have that choice. I can play the game a little bit and I can do loads of tasks and earn money. So then the next thing that we saw happening was retail started saying, I'm now earning these small amounts. I'm not aggressively looking to cash out. I have a goal in mind. I've got maybe something I'm saving towards. Where do I save Bitcoin? How do I do that? And then we realized, again, whilst you've got all of us in crypto that, we're well aware of the boom of stable coins and, all of these like crypto neobanks and crypto credit cards. On the retail side, this is a relatively new concept that, okay, I can now get exposure to crypto, but I can also get slightly better APRs than my current bank account or checking account. The friction is a UX one. I just don't know how to do it, because DeFi is very complex. So again, we just built a test in a couple of games where you can effectively save your Satoshi off-chain in game just by clicking a button. And we map that to retention, like 1 day, 7 days, 14 days, 30 days. And really simply, the longer that you save for, the slightly higher the reward. But this was nothing like 3,000% APRs, because we saw really quickly the higher percentage reward we offered, the more they thought it was a scam. So if it was like 6%, they're like, oh, that feels real and genuine. But if you offer like 30%, oh, hang on. So again, to Web3, 30%, they're like, that's not a lot. Whereas retail, you offer 30%, they're like, whoa, that's a scam. Continue to test it, iterate, roll this out to, a larger cohort of our player base. And then it was actually one of our investors. They were looking at the data that we were sharing from the game. And they were like, guys, this is interesting. You've now got 900,000 players earning crypto, and you've now got a growing cohort of players saving crypto. Why on earth are you not building a standalone digital savings app? And a few references they gave us that are great products like Mamo on Base as just one example. You're probably one of the biggest consumer crypto apps that no one's really known about because of the way that you're dressing it up. To your earlier point, that CT look at this and they're like, what have these Bitcoin games got to do with me? Why is this even relevant to me? They're not even a game. These guys don't make games. The earning, I'm just not interested. It's all useless. They're compared to most of these sort of DeFi consumer apps that again have got lovely shiny tech and promise lots of stuff and got no player base. You've already got, you're closing on 1 million customers, but you've already validated the core behavior, right? You can get people in top of funnel, and you can get people earning, and now you can get people saving. That's more than most of these retail apps can do in crypto. So that's really where Kinsu came from. When we went and did a bunch of research on the market, we looked at a lot of Web2 saving apps, Chip, Moneybox. There's no shortage of Web2 saving apps. So we want to understand the sort of UX and design there. We looked at a lot of the Web3 sort of offerings. So, Mamo is one example. Obviously, Aave have just released their app as well. And the decision we made is, okay, we think that our area of expertise that we've sort of proven now through these Bitcoin games is, user acquisition. So we don't actually hide Bitcoin in the ads at all. And we've got a pretty good sense now over the years as well on the sort of legal regulation side of where and how you can advertise. And that's really important. You don't just put an ad and people are like, yay, free crypto, come on in. There's a lot of complexity to even get them from the app to the store, to download the game, to stay in the game. And then UX, right? We've got very good retention in this sort of gamified DeFi mechanic that's in these Bitcoin games. So that's really what has inspired Kinsu. We see a giant gap amongst all these apps we see in Web3 for anything that feels familiar to Web2. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Web2 don't talk about yield. Web2, what interest rate have you got? They don't go, what yield have you got? They're like, what? Come again? That's a TradFi term. That's a Web3 term. So just little things like that.
I know kind of for me, when I've ever tried to get people involved, it's always on-ramps and off-ramps that have been the problem. Are you finding that it's still going to be your biggest hurdle for getting new people who probably aren't Web3 natives into the app?
Potentially, but again, the tech is there. So, whether it's, things like MoonPay, whether it's things like Plaid in the US market, where you can directly connect your, US bank account to third-party apps, whether it's things like your Revolut ID, there are there are many different on-ramps. But for us, that's what we're obsessing over, which is your question, is what is the fewest number of clicks we can get someone to deposit safely and securely into a USDC vault in a way that is very familiar to them. And I'll give you a couple of examples going through this process with Kinsu now. Is we're all very comfortable with some Web3 names. We hear them, we're like, oh, I know what that is. If I hear a Privy wallet, or if I hear you've been audited by Sherlock, I know what that is. Retail haven't got a clue what those are. They have no idea what that is. The same with some of these on-ramps. They don't know what they are. So things like Coinbase, in certain markets, of course, Coinbase is very familiar. That's something that increasingly is familiar and trusted. So a Coinbase on-ramp makes sense. So for us, it's more looking at, if we treat Kinsu like a startup, rather than going after every market, picking a couple of markets that we feel pretty confident about and locking into the on-ramps that are the most familiar familiar with the sort of retail audience that we think are already looking for this type of product, and making sure that's part of the onboarding and UX, versus if you put something in that they're not familiar with, you've got that extra friction because you're having to do the thing you don't want to have to do, which is start explaining, okay, this is what this thing is, this is how you use it. Like, I'm gone already, I'm going to go use the product where they've got the on-ramp that enables me to deposit funds really quickly, that I feel very confident and safe and secure in. So that's as much the battle as anything else.
I think there's plenty more I could probably jump into in that. I like the idea of now you're probably going after almost a completely different audience to where you started from. Is that an expectation, or are you going to have a bit of a funnel coming from where you've already got the audience and then go after someone else, or how do you see the audience profile being different?
I think there's a huge overlap there, because for the Bitcoin games, as I mentioned, we are looking to provide fair value and access to crypto to retail. So that hasn't changed. It's just the Play Ember games, the way we will continue to do it is through casual games. That's a very comfortable, recognizable way of getting people to play games with a business model that enables us to sustain that. Where that's different is that audience are coming to earn a certain amount that is within their frame of reference that we can provide. Where we're going after with Kinsu is, you don't have to play a game, right? But it's people that, it's very simple. They're financially literate. Like, if you spent a lot of time on TikTok, go on TikTok. We'll surprise people. We've started to put out some content, just how much money Web2 save. And that's a flex, right? For Kinsu, that is absolutely the audience that are financial literate, that want to save. And all we're saying is basically save faster. Really, rather than saving 2-3%, where you're not actually saving. If you take into account tax, inflation, etc., you're probably actually just breaking even, versus do the same thing that you love doing over here in our app, save faster towards those life goals or moments that, again, they're talking about on TikTok every day. Why are they saving? They're saving for, holidays, cars, apartments, rainy days, really boring stuff to crypto, but really important stuff to them. That's the new audience. Now, how it's going to work with Play Ember, we've nearly got 1 million customers over here. So of course, what we will start doing is inviting the Play Ember customers to start saving in Kinsu. And take Monzo as an example, what do these type of apps do to encourage people to make that first deposit or first transaction? Well, the thing we already have live in these, in the sort of gamified DeFi model in the games, it's like, download this app, do this first action, and you'll get bonus Satoshi. That's where Play Ember come in, and that's where we're fairly confident we have a slightly more cost-effective UA model than, let's say, in fintech, where we have them doing the thing we already want them to do with the behavior, and we will try and move as many of those customers over into Kinsu as well, which is going to be, we believe, far more cost effective than just sort of net new user acquisition for kind of like fintech customers. But again, we'll see. We only opened up open beta last week, literally V1 of the app, and we're working on the native mobile app right now. So yeah, we'll have more data to come on.
And then just to finish off with some quick fire questions. Do you think we'll escape from Twitter in the world of crypto, or do you think we'll always be chained to it?
Yeah, I think X is always going to be incredibly valuable to crypto, but we're seeing more and more creators now expand to TikTok, YouTube. I think crypto is already far broader than just X. We know this with this cycle. It's incredibly mainstream now. It's on the news, it's on Facebook. So I think X is always going to be that anchor for that true crypto crowd, but for retail, it's everywhere beyond X.
If you were talking to a founder who has a zombie product right now, but they've seen that their data should lead them somewhere else, what would be your one tip?
Just follow the data. Build for the actual customers using your app, not an audience that are not using your products in any way, but are effectively buying an asset or something in expectation of some financial upside. Your business is only going to grow if you've got customers and you've got your LTV, the money people are spending in your game or app is bigger than your cost of acquisition. So absolutely follow the consumer customer player data.
And even though saving and yield or APY isn't as exciting as other things happening in crypto, do you see it starting to take more of the actual mind share and use of crypto over the next couple of years?
Well, I think it already is. If you think about the macro in crypto right now, the number of people that are stabled up and they're looking for risk-off options to park stables, well, that's where we've had loads of people reaching out already about Kinsu. That's exactly what a large portion of the crypto audience are already looking for. I don't see stablecoins sort of slowing down, like the vast number of stablecoins. There's just a huge amount already. But I think for me, the interesting thing over the next couple of years is going to be, I was reading an article this morning about it, is whether that store of value still is Bitcoin or whether it is going to move to stable coins and, tokenized assets, etc. I think that's a very interesting space. But the way I think about a lot of these neobanks, it's no different to the disruption high street banks are going through right now, and people like Monzo and Revolut. Like for me, why on earth would I go to a bank? It's an inconvenience. For us, just like our Bitcoin games, there's just a generation going up that it's not going to be, this is Web 2, this is Web 3. It's just, this is the app I use to bank and save. And this gives me better benefits, better rates, and there's likely a sort of loyalty layer around it, like Revolut have, for example. There's some fun extra loyalty level. The more I save and work up a loyalty system where I get whatever it is, discount on WeWork, discount on Uber, you name it. That's the direction we are already heading in, right? The mistake that we are still making at times is this non-stop desire to label stuff Web 2 and Web 3, right? That's one of the biggest issues that we still have to break out of.
Well, it's been great catching up with the journey. It sounds like there's a lot of exciting stuff still to come with only just releasing now. Definitely be keeping an eye on it. I'm sure we can catch up again later to see how it actually plays out, see if the data continues leading you down that road. If people want to find out more though, where's the best place to find all the information?
As always on X, you can follow me on X and follow the Ember account. Has obviously gone on a bit of a refresh recently given the direction we're going on with Kinsu. So yeah, follow us on X and reach out if you want to talk more.
Sounds good. Cheers now.
Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it.